Hello and welcome to Text Readings with Greg Stafford, where we progressively work our way through the ancient biblical records as well as other related texts and histories. Currently, we're working our way through the book of Genesis, specifically the history recorded in the book of Genesis regarding Noah and the great flood. We're getting close to the conclusion, I should say, of our reading in the book of Genesis involving Noah and the flood and everything associated with it, the animals that he took into the ark, the fact that he and those with him were brought into the ark, male and female, the types of conditions that existed before Noah gathered the animals into the ark, and then what happened after the ark was closed. We also talked about the length of the flood, the time during which it rained, the time during which the waters released from underneath the earth and from the rain surged and dominated the earth according to the biblical description. We talked about how places like Göbekli Tepe, that you can look up online today, demonstrate exactly what the Bible describes in terms of what Noah did or was said to have done and told to do by the god Jaho, and that is to gather together animals and creatures, including birds and reptiles and insects of all kind. And we see exactly the types of creatures that are specified in the biblical account in Genesis, described in rock carvings in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, several hundred miles from where the ark landed. It appears to be a place where someone like Noah could and did keep and breed. It shows evidence of reproduction on the carvings at Göbekli Tepe, and certainly the site is built for animals only. There's no human structures for habitation there. It's only for the animals and creatures. They're housed in a very permanent or long-term way that would allow them to live and exist and reproduce until the time, at least in our view, when in the Bible it's described that God told Noah, enter into the ark, take all the animals, and then he sealed it up after him. And then after the flood, which is where we are now, the floodwaters are receding, the rain has stopped, and so we're at the point now where the earth is going to be repopulated after being completely extinguished, pretty much, except for everything in the oceans, right? The different water creatures, which could easily coexist regardless of whether there was salt and fresh waters like we have today. Because we have places on the earth, like, for example, with cenotes, where salt and fresh water exist side by side. So there's nothing inconsistent with what we observe continuously in nature or in the systems of the earth that would disallow the preservation of the different watery creatures, none of which are specified in the Bible as having to be preserved by Noah for the very reason that the means of destruction was water, right? The very thing that the ocean-going creatures and rivers and lake creatures that existed to some degree at that time, we don't know if it was exactly the same as we see lakes, rivers, and oceans today. But we know there were a lot of different aquatic types, most of which are no longer with us today. So it must have been different in some manner, or existing in the same way today, only in a different degree that would be suitable for those size of creatures. And these are gigantic sea creatures that we have evidence of in fossil records, for example. So we're at the point now where the animals preserved in the ark, all of the animals that breathe and that are on land or that fly in the sky heavens, are going to be released to repopulate the earth. And we're going to talk about that in comparison to different extinction theories about different events that people who believe creatures existed long before you might think they did, and that suffered extinction or near extinction level events. And we'll compare their views on some of those events with what's described in the Bible. But let's get right to it. We have a couple more sections of the flood account in Genesis. We'll finish with Noah and everything involving him and the story of the flood when we conclude with chapter 9. Today we're going to conclude chapter 8 by reading verses 15 through 22. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll bring up the section of text that I've translated to date. I'm doing both the Hebrew and Greek translations, so I mark those with H and G in parentheses, respectively. And I will go ahead and read first the Hebrew translation and then the Greek. And at times I may stop and make comments, or I'll read straight through and then we'll go back through and talk more about it. All right, you can follow along with your own translation, or again, you can follow along with me. Verse 15, Hebrew translation. Now God began to speak to Noah, saying, and then in the Greek, very similar. Some of these are pretty basic, but we'll read them anyway comparatively, so you can see the differences and how they are, how they were preserved in these different languages. Verse 15, Greek translation. And Lord God Jaho spoke to Noah, saying, verse 16, Hebrew translation. Go out from the box vessel, you and your woman and your sons women with you. Verse 16, Greek translation, Jaho speaking to Noah, you must come out of the wooden box craft, you and your woman and your sons women with you. Verse 17, Hebrew translation, every living thing which is with you, from all that is flesh, among the flyer and among the land animal, and among everything which moves, crawling upon the ground, bring them out with you, so their number grows in the earth, and so they have offspring, and become many upon the earth. Verse 17, Greek translation, all animals, as many as there are with you, and all flesh, from birds to pack animals and every reptile which is moving upon the earth, you must lead them out with you, and you must grow, and you must be made many in number upon the earth. Verse 18, Hebrew translation, so Noah began coming out, and his sons and his woman and his sons' women were with him. Verse 18, Greek translation, then Noah came out, and his woman and his sons women were with him. Verse 19, Hebrew translation, every living thing, everything moving and every flyer, everything crawling upon the ground. By their family types, they went out from the box vessel. Verse 19, Greek translation, all animals, even all pack animals, and every bird and every reptile moving upon the earth according to each type among them, they came out from the wooden boxcraft. Verse 20, Hebrew translation, then Noah began to build an altar to Jaho, and he started taking from every clean land animal and from every clean bird, and he started to offer complete or burnt sacrifices at the altar. Verse 20, Greek translation, after this Noah built an altar to God Jaho, and he took from among all the clean pack animals and from among all the clean birds, and he brought presentation offerings upon the altar. Verse 21, Hebrew translation, now Jaho began accepting the smell as it was relaxing. So Jaho began to say to himself, I will never again act to curse the ground as it exists among humankind's works, because the purpose behind the intention of the heart of humankind is evil from his very youth. And I am never again going to strike everything that is alive, as in the way which I have done. Verse 21, Greek translation, Lord God Jaho caught the scent, a smell that is pleasant. And Lord God Jaho, after careful thought, said, I will not further curse the earth, again due to the works of mankind, because the mind of humankind is burdened with interest over evil things from youth. Therefore, I will not further strike all living flesh again, like I just did. Verse 22, our last text, the Hebrew translation. During all times or days of the earth, sowing seed and gathering crops, cold and heat, summer and fall, day and night, they will not stop. Verse 22, Greek translation, last part of our text, and then we'll go back and talk about it. We'll also consider a few articles that have a relationship or that will complement what we'll discuss. Relationship to, or that will complement what we discuss. Verse 22, all the times of the earth, seed and harvest, cold and heat, summer and spring, day and night, they will not stop. Okay, so as we read here and in our prior text readings with regard to the expiration of life as a result of the flood, all of the life except for the aquatic types and all of the living things that were in the ark with Noah. And how there are other theories by those who don't necessarily follow the biblical history and account and who see the geologic time in larger terms, nonetheless believe that there were several extinction events similar to what you see or what we read here. Now, with regard to the flood story or history, it talks about the preservation of specific types of animals, clean and unclean, and their pairings, their numbers, their gender, everything they need to begin repopulating the earth. When it comes to these extinction events by those who don't really believe in a creator like Jah, who does actively create and then extinguish while preserving life again or creating it again, they don't see it that way. So they see these extinction events as random, just like the formation of life to them. Evolutionists is who I mean by them. And by evolutionists, I mean those who believe life came from non-life. And that all the living things that we see and that we've studied or have evidence of existing are mutations formed over time based on environmental factors. And again, somehow life coming from non-life or life being eternal but not intelligent, which we'll talk about later on, and in the coming CW Jaw Talk 30 show. But back to the text reading that we just did. So let's take a look at some of the information related to these extinction events. Let's look at this article in National Geographic. What are mass extinctions? What causes them? By Michael Greshko. Let's just take a look at the first couple paragraphs and see what it has to offer. More than 90% of all organisms that have ever lived on Earth are extinct. As new species evolve to fit ever-changing ecological niches, older species fade away. You see how they view it? It's just like no intelligence behind it. It's evolution. They fit ever-changing needs, no matter if it's random and unintelligent, and then other species fade away. But the rate of extinction is far from constant. At least a handful of times in the last 500 million years, this is their timeline, and I'm not going to get caught up into a discussion of geologic time in this video. We've talked about it before, and I will talk about it again in other videos. But just note that this, and as we've discussed before, this is how they view evolution in terms of the amount of time it would require for things to have evolved the way they see it. And so, over the course of this massive period of time that they see as required for evolution to have occurred, they believe a handful of times during this last 500 million years, 75 to more than 90% of all species have disappeared in a geologic blink of an eye in catastrophes we call mass extinctions. So a handful of times, evolutionists believe that 75 to more than 90% of all life on Earth went extinct. Though mass extinctions are deadly events, they open up the planet for new forms of life to emerge. So see how they see it? They see these catastrophic events that destroy as the fundamental elements environmentally to create life, for life to emerge. Right? So they're deadly, but then they somehow open up this way through this destruction of life for new life to emerge. How's that possible? Well, there's no real way it could happen, right? Any life forms that survive these mass extinction events, the 25 to maybe 5 to 10% in these few events, well, what would make them change? Right? Just because a massive explosion, less light, and barely surviving because everything's dead around you? How is that going to make an existing creature change into something else? It just doesn't biologically happen that way, right? We don't grow new extensions during the short time we're still alive to deal with existing conditions. And so there's no way for that to then replicate through DNA into a utility-based new life form that is a non-mutation something that's barely functional because of the destruction, right? All this destruction and devastation usually leads to food shortages, poor air quality, all the things necessary for life to be in its peak form. Water, of course, clean water. And yet they're claiming that these massive destructive events somehow lead the way for new life. And that's never explained because there's no way to explain it, because destruction never results in life. It's just a made-up view, right? Because they don't have any other view. They'd have to essentially come to the point where we are, that someone's making these things in the first place and then preserving some of them through. There's just no way to get new life forms out of the mass destruction of existing life forms, let alone get existing life forms from non-existing life forms. The whole idea of evolution, other than changes over time from existing species, which is a mark of design, right? Adaptation to our environment. Those are not marks of unintelligence. Yet evolutionists in both with regard to the original evolution of life and survival or new life emerging through these extinction events just doesn't have evidence. It never happens. So it's a theory through and through, and it's not even believable when you sit down and think about it and reflect on what they're really saying. Deadly events open up the planet for new life to emerge. Really? How? Never explained. It's just assumed that that's what happened. The most studied mass extinction, which marked the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene periods about 66 million years ago, killed off the non-Nonavian dinosaurs and made room for mammals and birds to rapidly diversify and evolve. So again, all of that just happened on its own. All these perfectly formed creatures, which is every creature, right? All of them, every one of us and everything, is not in a state of transition. They're not like working their way through to becoming a better form that can provide utility to its environment. No, they're already doing that in full form. Someone is making these new forms. They're not just coming out on their own through these destructive periods, but we'll just let them have their view. Let's talk a little bit more about this 66 million year ago extinction event, though, and what it really may tell us. So, because when it comes to this extinction event, well, let's read this article here on Iridium, but basically, in the 1980s, two scientists or geologists found a fairly, what they consider uniform but thin layer of iridium, which is the second most dense element, basically across the Earth. About 100 sites were checked, and it seems to be a consistent but thin layer of iridium over the Earth's surface. And they attach that to an asteroid. It used to be an asteroid. They're kind of going toward a comet now, because it's believed that asteroids contain a much higher concentration of iridium, unlike the Earth, which doesn't have as much comparatively uridium in terms of its overall content as do asteroids. But we're gonna see that that's still not a reason to believe that that's necessarily the cause for the iridium layer that covers the Earth. And even if it is, it won't make any difference in terms of the mass extinction theory that we'll talk more about in a moment. Okay, but in terms of this 66 million year ago Yucatan Peninsula alleged asteroid comet depositing iridium and then creating this mass extinction that we've been reading about here, and comparing it with the mass extinction in the Bible. So in the Bible, again, in the account we read and have been reading in Genesis, it describes specifically the types of creatures to bring, their number, their cleanliness, their gender, where they live and exist, and so they're not burdened with having to bring aquatic creatures, because that's the means of destruction. All of which is seen on the carvings in Göbekli Tepe, which was obviously used to house animals over a long period of time. Not just animals, but birds, right? It shows pictures of a bird with an egg in various stages of life, and insects and other crawling creatures, reptiles like scorpions, snakes, all of them there at this place. Okay, so now let's go back to this mass extinction theory regarding the Yucatan Peninsula, alleged to have occurred 66 million years ago. And I'm not saying that that didn't occur 66 million years ago, but you're going to notice that they attached that event to a mass extinction of what they consider then existing life forms, dinosaurs, which really isn't the same. They don't have the same evidence to prove. Let's continue. So this is an article from Live Science by Alina Bradford, December 2nd, 2016. I'll put links in the description below. Those are images of iridium. Rare, hard, and dense metal. Excuse me. So when it comes to the sources of iridium, today iridium is commercially recovered as a byproduct of copper or nickel mining. Ore containing iridium is found in Brazil, the United States, Myanmar, South Africa, Russia, and Australia. So it's in the earth. Pure iridium is so rare on Earth's crust that there's only about 2 parts per billion located in the crust, according to Chemistry Explained. Iridium is one of the densest and rarest Earth's natural elements. It is so dense that it mainly exists in the Earth's core, rather than crust, said Amanda Simpson, an assistant professor of chemical engineering at the University of New Haven. But some iridium exists in the crust. In 1980, scientist Luis Alvarez and his son, it says Walter Alvarez, that may be Walter though, found significant amounts of iridium in a certain part of the Earth's crust spread out over the Earth's surface. This is what I was referring to earlier. They speculated that it was caused by a meteor and linked this to the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years prior. This is why you see all those images of a comet or on film, like with Walking with Dinosaurs and other movie productions, the comet being the cause or the agent of destruction for the dinosaurs. Because of finding this layer of iridium in the Earth's crust, essentially in a uniform but light layer throughout the Earth. So they speculated that the high concentration was due to an asteroid that hit the Earth 66 million years ago, and then in association with that, they said this must have been how the dinosaurs died. So they put the dinosaurs 66 million years far back, and they may have already had them there, of course, based on their timeline, which is hundreds of millions of years. My point is, there's nothing that requires us to put the dinosaurs 66 million years ago because of this asteroid impact. This asteroid could have impacted the Earth and even been used by Jaho to bring iridium to the Earth as an anti-corrosive element in certain parts of the crust, and or because of its density and overall contribution to the Earth's elements in ways that when he's bringing the Earth into formation through these inner volcanic eruptions from the core where the highest concentration of iridium exists, then see, they never include Jaho in that kind of formative process. It's always, well, we don't even consider that anyone's actually making this thing, this Earth, right? It's layered. It's got systems operating with precision that we can use to base our watches, clocks, calendars by. Yet they never consider that Jaho is actually the one who put those elements in the Earth. However many years ago is not really our concern, but the idea that just because a uniform layer of iridium was deposited as part of the formation of the Earth, either by an asteroid, and that's not conclusive, by the way, we'll get to more of that in a moment, or through volcanic eruption, which we'll talk further about in a moment, wouldn't make any difference, because if you accept that Jaho exists based on life only coming from life, and that life being demonstrably intelligent, right, versus unintelligent, and going through these mutative processes where we would never have the kind of uniform bilateral symmetry we see, along with the other systemic processes working the way they do, we'd kind of just be working. It's so ridiculous to even consider. But if it had actually happened in some way where we're actually going through this accidental evolution and random mutation over time, we wouldn't be 100% in line with our environment and balanced and structurally complete the way we are, right? We would be going through these cycles of evolution where we would clearly, to some degree, lack some of that balance and symmetry. So, moving back, though, to the whole issue of this mass extinction, We've talked again about how the Bible lays it down. We have evidence of the flood all around. Even scientists say that the earth would have originally had to have been covered in water, just like Genesis 1 describes as well, and then was recovered in water during the flood. We've talked about how that fits with the evidence we have of the amount of water on, underneath, and in caps and above the earth, in the clouds. Everything fits. Even this idea of an iridium layer across the earth, either from an asteroid impact or from underground, from the core. Volcanic eruptions that we're going to see may even be related to this event 66 million years ago. That doesn't prove anything as far as whether or not that's how the dinosaurs were really killed, or whether they even existed that far back. It is simply linked to that because of the finding of iridium that is attached to this asteroid or comet that they believe could cause a mass extinction. You see how this all works? It's not really evidence-based. Part of it is, right? There's iridium that has been found in about 100 spots in a uniform manner that would require some explanation. But if Jah is the creator, uniformity is what you'd expect. In fact, the uniformity is what you might then use to say, well, wait a minute. There's intelligence behind that. Somebody's providing a uniform layer of a very special and rare element. Why is that inconsistent with the idea of a creator? The one who made everything else? Didn't he make every other layer? And aren't all of the new layers of the earth made through the processes that he set in motion, or that are certainly in motion, from the core to the surface, to the tectonic plates, to the volcanoes? Who's making all these layers if it's not the one who made the things that are making those? Let's talk more about some of these things regarding the iridium. So this is from a section of a book by D.L. Finnegan and T.L. Miller, as well as W.H. Zoller. The chapter from their book, Iridium and Other Trace Metal Enrichments from Hawaiian Volcanoes. Okay. Actually, I want to go here first real briefly. Yeah, let's do this. We'll go to that in a moment. But before we go there, this is an article I found online by maybe an amateur geologist, someone who certainly has compiled information, who does geology depictions. But I found his summary of some information very useful. I'll put a link below and you can read it yourself. But he's basically borrowing from all the existing information and theories, and he has references and credits at the end that you can see for yourself. So this is L. E. Moore, January 23rd, 2006, Earth Sciences, Geology. Looks like maybe a paper for a class. But what I liked about it, I'm not citing this as a technical authority, although I think it was prepared fairly well and well referenced, right? So you can check it out. This summary right here. All right, so we're talking about the extinction event 66 million years ago, comparing it with the Bible and the account of the flood. We're talking about this iridium layer that people had believed since the 80s at least was deposited likely by an asteroid or comet and may have caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. So what's wrong, or is there any reason to doubt this idea of iridium, the iridium layer that we're talking about, being deposited by a mass or near mass extinction event like an asteroid impact? 3 extinction events have been linked to extraterrestrial impacts based on the presence of iridium in rock layers. Okay, the Great Dinosaur Extinction, dated at about 65 million years ago, referred to as what we've been talking about, the Cretaceous Tertiary, or more commonly today, I believe, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, or the KT boundary. All right, so that extinction event, the one we've been talking about, based on the crater and the evidence that appears to exist in the Yucatan Peninsula for such an impact, there's high iridium concentration, there's crater evidence, the impact theory is widely accepted, though not necessarily as the single cause for extinction, and it's debated by some scientists who are intrinsic gradualists rather than catastrophists. So that's how he describes it. But note here, though, that this has high iridium concentration behind it, a clear crater evidence. The Permian extinction, which occurred about 245 million years ago, has crater evidence, but very limited iridium presence, and a disputed theory. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction, which occurred approximately 200 million years ago. High iridium concentration, but no impact crater. So all three of these events that are based on the presence of iridium in rock layers are inconsistent. Right? This one has high iridium, crater evidence. This one has crater evidence, very limited iridium. This one has high iridium, no crater evidence. They're all three inconsistent with tying the presence of iridium, especially in high concentration, to an impact crater. So that's something to keep in mind. Now let's go back to that article I was about to read right here from this section of the chapter referenced here from this book by Finnegan, Miller, and Zoller, Iridium and Other Trace Metal Enrichments from Hawaiian Volcanoes. Particles and gases were sampled at Mauna Loa. This was from January 1st, 1990. Particles and gases were sampled at Mauna Loa volcano during and after its eruption in March and April 1984. It's important to remember the date of this article. That's why I reference it, January 1st, 1990, when it was determined that particles and gases sampled at the Mauna Loa volcano during and after its eruption in 1984 and at Kilauea in 1983, 84, and 85. These samples were analyzed by INAA for more than 40 elements. Iridium was found at Kilauea and Mauna Loa in samples collected during as well as after fountaining activity. Osmium was only found in the Mauna Loa samples. It's also found in platinum ore, which is related to iridium as well. Elements 77 and 76, I believe, respectively. Enrichment factors for iridium in the volcanic fumes range from 10 to 12 relative to Hawaiian rock. Okay, iridium fluxes at Mauna Loa and Kilauea range from 80 to 30,000. Okay, let's move down a little bit. Some of this isn't as important. The amount of iridium released from the magma into the fumes was 1 to 12%. Keep that in mind. Calculations assuming Deakin volcanism, we'll talk more about that in a moment, as the source for iridium at the KT boundary layer, what we've been talking about with regard to the 66 million year old Yucatan Peninsula asteroid impact crater. For the iridium at the KT boundary layer showed that the concentration of iridium left in the basalts may be too low to account for all of the KT iridium. It would require a very high fraction, more than 80%, of the iridium to be purged from the basalt to account for all of it, which cannot be supported by the Hawaiian data. Now let's read this last paragraph. The implications of iridium from Hawaiian volcanoes for the KT iridium anomaly are not conclusive, but seem to weaken the volcanic explanation and strengthen the impact position, the asteroid comet impact position. The question of whether the iridium at the KT boundary is from asteroids or comets or volcanic eruption. Since iridium has been found only in fumes from Hawaiian volcanoes, further investigations at other volcanoes, such as Piton de la Fournaise on Reunion Island, are needed to evaluate the importance of volcanoes as sources for the iridium at the KT boundary. All right, let's keep that in mind for a moment. So they're kind of depressing the idea that the volcanic activity could produce enough iridium. There's some, based on the evaluations of the volcanic eruptions at the Hawaiian volcanoes. And it says the amount of iridium released from the magma into the fumes was 1 to 12%. And that it would require a very high fraction of over 80% to account for all of the iridium at the KT boundary line. Okay, let's take that with us and go to one more article. Here, and Tracking the Course of Evolution, the KT Extinction by Richard Cohen. This is from someone who is a proponent of I believe, the asteroid comet theory for the extinction causing event, inclusive of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. I'll put a link below. So these aren't like necessarily biblical scientists. These are evolutionists for the most part, as far as I know. And he talks a lot about different things. Very good article. And then here, he gets into whether a giant volcanic eruption could have caused the... Could be the cause for the high concentration of iridium related to the KT boundary and the 66 million year old extinction event. So this was written in 1999. And remember the prior excerpt from the book that we read regarding the concentrations of the Hawaiian volcanoes fumes was in 1990. So this is about 10 years later. And of course, we're even 20 years beyond that now. But still, that's not the point. The point is, note the comparison between what he says here and what was said in the prior article. We'll go back to it in a moment. That it would require more than 80%, a fraction of more than 80%. So in this article, notice he says, a giant volcanic eruption, question, exactly at the KT boundary, a new plume was burning its way through the crust close to the plate boundary between India and Africa. Enormous quantities of basalt flooded over what is now the Deccan Plateau of western India to form huge lava beds called the Deccan Traps. Remember, I told you we'd come back to that. A huge extension of that lava flow on the other side of the plate boundary now lies underwater in the Indian Ocean. The Deccan Traps cover about 200,000 square miles. I'll try to just go with the simple references. But they may have covered 4 times as much before erosion removed them from some areas. They may have covered 4 times as much. They have a surviving volume of 240,000 cubic miles and are over 2 kilometers thick in places. The entire volcanic volume that erupted, including the underwater lavas, was much larger than this. Furthermore, the Deccan eruptions began suddenly just before the KT boundary. The peak eruptions may have lasted only about 1 million years, plus or minus 50%, but that short time straddled the KT boundary. The rate of eruption was at least 30 times the rate of Hawaiian eruptions today, even assuming it was continuous over as much as 1 million years. If the eruption was shorter or spasmodic, eruption rates would have been much higher. The Deccan Traps probably erupted as lava flows in fountains like those of Kilauea, rather than in giant explosive eruptions like that of Krakatoa. But estimates of the fire fountains generated by eruptions on the scale of the Deccan Traps suggest that aerosols and ash would easily have been carried into the stratosphere. The Deccan plume is still active. Its hot spot now lies under the volcanic island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean. And then we'll conclude with this. Thus, there is strong evidence for the short-lived but gigantic volcanic eruptions at the KT boundary. Some people have tried to explain all of the features of the KT boundary rocks as a result of these eruptions. But the evidence for an extraterrestrial impact is so strong that it's a waste of time to try to explain away all that evidence as volcanic effects. Now, I would say, hit the mic there. I would say that's not the case. Because again, he's saying that the rate of eruption was at least 30 times the rate of eruptions of Hawaiian eruptions today. What did it say in this article here? That it would require a high fraction of over 80%, whereas in the volcanic fumes released in the magma from the Hawaiian volcanoes was 1 to 12% iridium. But if it was 30 times that, right, then we're talking 30 to way over more than 80%. So it is there, the math is there, that if both of these are correct, namely that the Hawaiian concentrations are around 1 to 12%, and that it would require over 80% to account for all of the iridium at the KT boundary, well, then, according to this here, the rate of eruptions was 30 times higher And that's assuming it was continuous over as much as 1,000,000 years. If it was shorter, eruption rates would have been higher. So it could have even been more. But then you notice, see, it's like he wasn't really aware, maybe, of the concentration, like from the prior article, of 112% in the volcanic fumes of Hawaii in terms of the iridium concentration. Because if he was, and he still sees here, the writer of this article, that it was 30 times what we can measure today in terms of the iridium concentration from volcanic eruptions, and even potentially more, it's not a waste of time. The evidence is pretty overwhelming. Now, they say, of course, that because of the impact and the crater and these associated events with the iridium and it being found in higher concentrations in asteroids typically, although as we saw earlier in the summary provided here, that's not always the case, or the association between the crater evidence and the iridium concentration is not always as high. So, either way, this writer, in spite of noting that the rate of volcanic eruptions would be 30 times higher than what we see from Hawaii today, and therefore potentially the iridium concentration up to 30 times higher, still goes with he notes all that, but is still persuaded by the extraterrestrial impact as sort of that these events occurred basically at the same time or over the same period, really, right? Millions of years. Not the impact of the comet, but the effects of the comet or asteroid combined with the volcanic eruptions is really what the picture he's trying to paint here. So either way, according to this article or this section from this chapter, over 80% in terms of the concentration of iridium in the volcanic eruptions, which 30 times what we're seeing from Hawaiian volcanoes today would account for that mathematically, if not more. It is very possible that volcanic eruptions, right, because even iridium is concentrated most highly in the core of the Earth, and the Earth is formed from within. It's constantly producing new layers, pumping out magma, and these concentration of elements, high concentrations of elements at times, depending on which element we're talking about. But when it comes to iridium, it would depend, of course, on the rate of eruptions. We're talking earlier in Earth's history. And we see it as Jaho. Jaho using the mechanisms of the Earth that he made to keep the Earth the way it is, bringing forth these different elements, even in a uniform manner, so much so that we'd have to say that the comet or asteroid that contributed the iridium, if that's what caused it 66 million years ago, I'm not sure that can fully account for that uniform layer of iridium over the entire Earth. But that's why this other article then goes into the volcanic eruptions as a contributing factor. And while that may be true, I'm not suggesting or claiming or arguing against that asteroids and comets, even like at the KT boundary and the Yucatan Peninsula crater, occurred, or that these massive volcanic eruptions occurred over this period of time. That's not inconsistent with what the Bible describes as the earth being made, and then long after the heavens and the earth were made, Jahawa then came to a unformed earth and began to form it over periods of time, not days. They're not 24-hour, they couldn't be 24-hour days, at least not all of them, as I discussed in my prior videos, because they're called days or periods of time before there's even a sun and moon and stars for us to measure days by. So the evidence is not there to support that the days of Genesis are literal 24-hour days, because the elements that we use to define 24-hour days weren't even in place during all of those days yet. And so Jahawa was preparing and forming the earth, just like we see talked about in sections of the Bible like Proverbs 8, where it's described, in Job, and of course in Genesis 1. None of these things are inconsistent with an intelligent creator. There are problems with these random accidents as being the cause of all these things, because again, as we've shown, the concentration of iridium and craters are not always associated. They don't correlate the way you would expect if that was the sole cause of the concentrations of iridium in relation as it relates to some of these extinction events. And even then, let's say that these extinction events occurred. They're assuming that these events, the asteroid, that life existed then. Right? That the assumption that they're making is dinosaurs were alive when the asteroid and or the volcanic eruptions occurred. And that's not clear at all. And the evidence is actually very much against that. Now, they'll argue that their timeline and other evidence supports their view, and I'm not going to get into it all now. I've talked probably a little bit too much about the whole iridium thing, but I wanted to get into it sufficiently so that we understood this idea and what's behind it. Right? There's nothing wrong with the idea of a comet or asteroid, either as part of Jaho's cosmologic patterns and mechanisms that bring and carry away debris at different times, being part of the means by which he can form different planets or moons or structures, cosmological structures like the moon, and bring to the earth elements that make it what it is, that allow for it to contain the things that create a magnetic field, that allow it to orbit as part of the solar system the way it does, with all its weight and balance and layers and atmospheric stuff. I mean, there's a ton of things that go into what is the earth. Iridium is just one element. But it's brought up often with regard to the cause for the dinosaurs dying. And that does not follow at all from the fact that there may be, or from the potential fact that the iridium layer discovered in the 80s may be because of an asteroid or comet, or volcanic eruptions, as we've discussed. That does not mean that dinosaurs were alive to be destroyed back then by those things, by all the iridium dust or anything else, by the blocking out of the sun. They're assuming that by their theory regarding iridium deposits in association, at least with the 66-year-old mass extinction event, but also with some others. It's just not consistent. All right, so now let's go back to talk about some of the other elements in our reading with regard to things like the significance of the sacrifices. So it's very clear that the biblical record is more reasonable when it comes to surviving a mass extinction event, right? I mean, having male and female and multiple pairs of each type is certainly going to allow you to repopulate the earth with all those types than a mass extinction event like some evolutionists claim took place when there were so many creatures alive. And then they just re-evolved, right? New life emerged from these massively deadly events. So they're in contradiction, and nothing in the Bible with regard to the story and the mass extinction of the flood and the surviving living things and the reproduction of those types, none of it is inconsistent with the evidence that we have today. Now, so what about the significance of sacrifice? What's reasonable about that, right? What's going on here with Noah presenting of his best types, right? The clean animals, right? The ones that were more important. So he gave of those to Jaho. And it says that Jaho, as a result of smelling the sacrificial odor, was pleased. It was pleasant. And it's not just that the animal burning up was pleasing. It was the act of faith by Noah in giving up of something that was valuable to him, but that he needed Jaho to continue to give to him anyway. So he was essentially giving back to Jaho what Jaho had gave to him, and showing his confidence. It showed Noah's belief that Jaho would give him more when he only had a limited number at that time because the flood had just occurred. He had absolute faith in Jaho, and Jaho was pleased at that. That's what Noah should have done. When Jaho saw that Noah was doing what he should have done and acknowledging his belief in Jah and what he had just done, and giving up one of the few things of value he had because he was so confident that Jaho was the one giving it to him in the first place, there were few other ways, if any other ways, to really show Noah's appreciation for Jaho. And there must be something about these sacrifices that when they take place in different ways, right? We know that gods and spirits in different religions throughout history have had sacrifices, human and other. Whereas in the Bible, that human sacrifice is never promoted for Jaho's sake. And here with Noah, he's offering an animal type, a clean animal. And so there must be some kind of significance, spiritual and otherwise, that is transmitted through the offering in faith of these animal sacrifices, which we then see repeated through the law given to Moses. So it has benefits in multiple ways if done right, the way Jaho likes, not the way the other sons of God and those who resist him promote, especially not human sacrifice. So these other creatures were given to us, even from the time of Adam and Eve forward, although there were no sacrifices during the time of Adam and Eve that we can see before they started to do things against Jaho. It's almost like after the account in Eden, humans felt the need to demonstrate in more expressive ways faith in Jaho, because they had given it up, or it wasn't the same. It certainly wasn't the same as it was in the Garden of Eden. They weren't eating animals. There's no mention of any sacrifices yet. Whether it would have happened, again, for some benefit that we don't fully understand, we don't know. We just know what took place from that point forward and what ultimately occurred with Noah. And so this was his way, whatever he understood as appropriate or that was potentially done by others in the pre-flood days as a way to worship Jaho, right? Going all the way back to Seth and others who were pleasing Jaho, Enoch. So these are all people Noah would have known and learned from, either directly or over time. And so this practice of offering to Jaho in this way must have been something he understood as showing his appreciation for what had happened. And Jaho was so pleased, he promised never again to take away from the earth all living things the way he had done. And so this was his way of showing his appreciation, his satisfaction for the actions of Noah. And so while the earth may be destroyed by fire, that's still a lot better than a long death by drowning, I would say, right? Something horrible about the flood that though the world at that time deserved, by Noah's faith, we're spared from in the future. So that's a good thing. And then we'll have further discussion about that and the sign that Jaho gives in our next text reading to show and to help remind humans and all the earth, really, because of the terror of the flood, that it will be no more. So that'll be the rainbow that we'll have in our next reading. But now let's talk about something else. The way that the flood impacted the earth to such an extent that it was changed forever. When Noah came off that ark, and when the waters receded from the earth, when we look at places like the Yonaguni Monument, buried in the ocean off the coast of Japan or Taiwan, in between, and then high up in the Peruvian mountains, Lake Titicaca, as well as other locations, as I mentioned, Göbekli Tepe, that was buried under sand not too far from where the ark landed. When I look at the earth, and when I consider the way that Jaho withdrew the waters over a period of 10.5 months, dominated the earth, changed it, and then withdrew them, and then I look at an image of the earth like we're going to do now, tell me what you see, and I'll tell you what I see. I've talked about this before. So there's one image you can see, right? And to me, this looks like you have an eagle or a bird here up on the left, and then you have a bear or a land animal on the right. And you know, if you've studied subjects like Pangea, right, the so-called one land continent that was allegedly in formation millions of years ago and then has gradually been separating, and that where South America and Africa at one time fit, and so you see that kind of section there. I don't think so. And even if it was formed in that way, remember the water covered the entire earth. It was up to Jaho to say where to recede it, or at what point to hold it back. And he held it back at this point. And these structures, South America and Africa, you know why I think they look similar? Because they represent the same thing. Fish. I believe these are two predatory beasts fighting over prey. And this is the condition of the earth today, and that it's been in ever since the time of the flood. And Jaho knew it would be in that way. And so he left this image for us. Let's take another look. Here's another look at that image. Now, I'm going to show you this image side by side with a couple others. And if you go to my channel, if you look on the subscriptions to the right, you'll see I have 2 right now. I'll put some more up. But if you look at the ones I have, you'll see one gives you live streams into nature, and a lot of bear streams and eagle streams. The reason I have those is because of this image right here. I want you to see what I think you're seeing right here. An eagle catching a fish in its talons with its wings spread out, and a bear in the waterfall area on a rock or jumping off a rock with its arms out and mouth open, grabbing a fish. Let me show you why I think that. Here's a bear. Let's look at what it does. Let's watch it for a moment. Look at it. It's fishing. See how it's covered in the water? You see how you can't really make out its legs right now, can you? Part of it's distorted. It's got that big muscular back, big skull, the ears. Its mouth is closed right now, big snout. So you got to keep that in mind when it comes to the image that I'm showing you right here, right? Because I believe the blue is the water and the sky, so that it can be both the place where the bear is and the fish and where the eagle flies. And the white parts are the clouds and the bubbling water, where you see the bear swimming around. Now he's gone down. Let's see now. He's looking for the fish. It's a predator looking for prey, and they get it. Look at him standing now. You can see part of his feet. They're a little bit different, right? A little stubby. Got it. Boom. Fish in the mouth. Now I want you to compare this. It'll be a little bit tricky. Because it's on the other side, right? I mean, this bear's on the left, whereas this bear's on the right in that image. But essentially, now remember, on the image on the right with the earth, it's a little bit rounded or curved. Flat earth people, I'm not even going to entertain your position. It's been defeated over and over again. You have no merit. You're done. There's curvature here, so it's a little bit flattened out. So it's, whereas the bear in the video here, he's standing straight up, right? He's not curved back. So there's a little bit of an image distortion, but this is essentially what I believe you're looking at. This bear, right like that, right like this, kind of on his all fours, leaning down or out, grabbing that fish. Let me get a little better image here for you guys. A little tricky. We'll get it though. See? It's on the other side, but that's what you're seeing right there. I believe you're seeing a bear or a similar creature right here. I mean, a bear fits because of its love for fish and the way it eats fish in the water like this. And what do we see today? We see Russia with, and a strong affinity for the bear as its symbol and image, and America and the eagle. And I'm not necessarily saying that these two images represent those two companies, those two countries, but they represent the condition the earth exists in, that is in fact promoted by both those countries, right? Good or bad to differing degrees, they both are like bears and eagles in the way they fight in different ways. But I'm not going to get into that too much. But certainly in terms of their imagery, right? So I believe the bear right here going after this fish, I'll put a link to this specific video here, is what you're seeing in part of that image. I'll line up a little bit better here for you. Okay, so it's kind of like that right there. But it's flipped. That's what I believe you're seeing. Okay? So let me go ahead and, in fact, I'm going to take a clip of that real quick right there. Let me do that. I have my little snippet up. Where'd it go? Oh, well, it's buried somewhere in there. Okay, so as you can see, I believe these are pretty similar. So you can look at that, make your own opinion. But I wanted to show you the bear video and the image in this way so you can get a better sense of what I'm talking about when I say these things. All right. He's going to go all through it, too. I mean, this is a big deal for the bear. You can see the paws, just like I believe you see here, up over the top there and down below. And so these definitely complement each other in that way. All right, so now I'm going to show you the eagle, and then we'll wrap this up. But that's kind of what we're dealing with. He's even on the right side right there. See what I'm talking about? I mean, I could stop this at numerous points, and it will show a reflection of what I believe Jaho left for us. I believe the earth is the biggest image on earth. The biggest image on earth is the earth. Everything Jaho does is perfect. From the iridium concentration to the images he left for us to show us the way the earth would exist at the time it existed, just like he left as its image. All right, so now what about the eagle? Check this out. Let's watch this vid here, and then I'm going to do a similar comparison, okay? Let's just watch it together so you get a sense of what I'm talking about and why I believe on the left side of the map we were looking at is an eagle. Look at this. Boom, talons out, wings spread right there. He's going down. And I'm going to come back to this point. We're going to look at this side by side, but you see what I'm saying? Boom, fish. Okay, so what you're seeing right there, he has the fish. He or she has the fish. This eagle. Now, look at this. So you can't see the fish because the fish is below the water right now, right? Okay. Now it's coming out. We missed a little bit of the footage, but do you see what I'm saying? That's what I'm talking about. We're going to go back to this in a moment. Let's watch the full takeout here. It's amazing. Boom! Fish is out in the talons, wings spread out. Look at this. It's amazing. These are Jah's creatures, and he made them. And he made the very images that display our behavior. Boom! So at this point right there, he's got the fish. So when I show you this right here, the fish is in the water right here, and that eagle is in the sky. That's why the blue is perfect for both. Jaho gets it right all the time, right? No big surprise there, but it's just amazing when you see it. And you're like, am I really seeing that? Yes, you are. You're seeing Jah everywhere. Why wouldn't you? Right? Why wouldn't he have marks of his actions everywhere? Well, what bigger action was there than the flood? Right? That destroyed everything and that he receded deliberately and left the image that we have. Watch this. Let me show you this comparison. So let him grab it again right there. Right? There. Right? Actually, there. Okay. Now, let's do a good comparison here and show what I'm exactly talking about with respect to the eagle. I think if we actually back up a second, right there, it's very much like that, right? The beak out, the wings are out. You got one wing going this way for Alaska, and you have the other wing going up over. See how his wing's going to come down and then curve around? You'll see it. See how the wing at the edge curves in and like makes a curvature like I did with my hand? Wings, talons out. Just like you see on the left. And now, boom. Beak. It is such a majestic. Everything Jah does, of course, is majestic. But I mean, when we're looking at things like this and we're comparing them to the earth, things you could only see from space. See, he knew we would reach this point. He knew we would be in this place. That's why he confused our languages. That's why in the account we're going to get to after the story of Noah and the flood, in Genesis, starting in Genesis 10, we're going to read about how when God saw humans populating the earth, he knew nothing would be too much for us. And where are we today? We're way out in space. We can see the images that Jah left for us. And we can see that they match exactly the types of creatures he made for us. And by that representation, we can see too, he's telling us this is what we do. This is what we've become. And isn't that exactly what the Bible describes? The nations and people acting like beasts. Dominating each other. Man dominating man to his injury. Just like a beast and another beast. Or two beasts fighting over prey. And so that is what I believe we're looking at when we see the earth today. And why we do these text readings. All the stuff that we can appreciate when it comes to explaining things like comets, asteroids, volcanic eruptions. How none of that requires us to believe that they caused mass extinction events. And in fact, it's consistently deposited throughout the earth in ways that would be consistent and that are consistent with a creator making these different things from within the core of the earth through lava flows, plate tectonics, and even things like asteroids and comets, right? He can use any of those. He made all of those. All of them are traveling throughout space, doing different things, just like dust particles of debris when we see them on sunny days through, for example, windows and blinds, right? Little particles, every one of them is there for a reason. Jaho measures everything. He knows the season. We should not expect any of this as an accident. Accidents don't happen like this. Accidents don't produce images that look exactly like the creatures we live with and do the things that they do, but that we're doing and shouldn't do, as a warning to us, to tell us this is what you become. The earth that I made that had a different image at first, when I first brought the waters back, that one's done. Now you have this one. And this is what you'll be until the new earth comes. So that's at least how I see it. I believe it's consistent with the text, with the events in Genesis that are described relative to the flood and its impact on the earth, its transformative effect. So I hope you'll continue to join me as we continue with our text readings. We'll finish up with the biblical history of Noah and the flood, complete chapter 9, and then we'll move right into chapter 10 involving the Tower of Babel and Nimrod.